Okay, so whilst we wait, does anyone want to let us know how the Sabbath has been? Any special blessings this Sabbath? Anyone wants to share? A yes at the back. Would you like to come forward and share?
Happy Sabbath all. All right, shall we stand as we have the opening prayer? Let us pray. Eternal Father and our soon coming King, we're grateful for this afternoon that you would have given unto us. We're thankful that you gave unto us the word. You gave unto us the physical food. And now, mighty God, you're going to grant unto us counsels regarding life and our way forward in the future, not just for ourselves, but for our families too. I ask of thee that you'll help us to listen intently. May we ask necessary questions, and mighty God, may you through the presenter teach us wisdom in all things. May all things be done decently and according to your name's honor and glory we do pray. Amen.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And I hope you've all had a wonderful Sabbath. So, does anyone know what today's AYS is about at all? Any ideas? You just want to shout forward what you think it's about? Yes. So, it's called Keep Your House in Order. So, I just want to find out, if you don't mind sharing, who here is under the age of 35? Okay, that's quite a few. And if you don't mind sharing, have you ever thought about writing a will? Okay. So the idea for today's program initially came from Auntie CJ. And what it was is, I personally find that as young people, we don't discuss topics such as life insurance and will writing enough. We think that these topics usually should be discussed when we're older, maybe we have children and we're looking to retire. But honestly, that's actually not the case. The Bible speaks about future planning and making sure our houses are in order. Proverbs 13, verse 22 is an example of this. A good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of the sinner is laid up for the just. So, I would like to introduce to you our presenter for this afternoon. Her name is Kerrie Burrell, and she is a wife and mother of 2 boys who are her inspiration for taking this course in her career. In 2010, Kerrie qualified as a solicitor, specializing in commercial litigation and company insolvency. Several years later, after dedicating much of her time to raising her children, running a business from home, and supporting her husband in his business endeavors, she decided to re-enter the legal field, this time in an area of law that enables her to bring her Christian values such as benevolence, sympathy, and thoughtful stewardship into her career. She now works as a self-employed consultant solicitor for Setfords and Taylor Rose MW, specializing in wills, probate, powers of attorney, and trusts. And Kerrie thrives in the fact that she can now use her legal career as a form of ministry for Christ. So please give a hearty amen as we welcome Kerrie to the front.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for that introduction, Rianne. I want to extend my thanks to the whole church, really, for inviting me here, but in particular to the AY department. Thank you. I know Demetrius isn't here at the moment, but thanks for organising this for us, Rianne, today. It's been a blessing. Thank you. I hope everybody here will receive a blessing from today. I know sometimes we go to presentations, we don't know what to expect. I'm hoping that what you will receive is better than what you've expected. I know it's late, so bear with me. I'm hoping not to make everybody fall asleep. And do feel free. I don't mind you, if you've got a burning question, I don't mind you raising your hand throughout. We will have questions and answers at the end, but if you've got something you want to ask, I am not going to make you wait to the end if you really want to ask a question. Okay, so without any further ado, we're going to be looking at the topic of, is your house in order today? I'm going to... Is this on? Thank you. It was on. Let's point to the back. Point to that. Okay. Yeah, if you don't mind. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be looking at three major topics today: wills, trusts, powers of attorney, declarations of trust, and lasting powers of attorney. Okay, so you're going to understand today what is required to make a will valid, and important matters to consider in making a will as well. We're going to look at declarations of trust. I know most people are familiar with the term wills, but maybe not declarations of trust. And they are so useful, especially for younger people and for older people. They're so versatile. You can make them as interesting and as elaborate as you really want to. And then there are lasting powers of attorney as well. So lasting powers of attorney is about how you can retain your right to make decisions for yourself when you may have lost capacity. But it's something that you have to put in place before you lose capacity. Yeah? Okay, so we're going to be looking at, what does the word testament mean? Now, when I see a will in front of me, it normally says last will and testament. I thought to myself, that sounds like a biblical term. So I looked into this and I looked at, is anybody familiar with this man on the screen? Anybody know who he is? No? Okay, so this is Webster, and he's got a dictionary. Yeah, you know him now, right? You didn't know what he looked like. All right, so he looks very old, so yeah, back in the past, but it's very relevant because I like to use his definitions because we get a Bible definition. And I think as Christians, it's important to look at things from the perspective of somebody who understands where we're coming from as well. So what does the word testament mean? And it says that a solemn, authentic instrument in writing, this is otherwise called a will. And it also says the name of each general division of the canonical books of the sacred scriptures, as the Old Testament, the New Testament, the name is equivalent to a covenant. Now, as Adventists, that word covenant should really stand out to us. Yeah, because as Adventists, we enter into a covenant with our Maker, right? Yeah? So, who would have thought that, the word testament has that direct link with us and our beliefs? And it says also that it applies to the Old and the New dispensations, that of Moses and that of Jesus Christ. So, are we familiar with the two covenants in the Bible? Yeah? The two covenants in the Bible? If you're not, that's fine. We're going to have a look at that briefly. So in Genesis 3:15, that's where we get the first promise that we're going to receive. Obviously sin was committed, and God said, he said that he's going to send his son to die for us, yeah? I know some of you are probably thinking, what has this got to do with wills? What has this got to do with inheritance? But we're going to see very clearly that it has a direct link to what we're looking at today. So in Exodus 19, verse 5, God says, "Now therefore, if you will obey my voice indeed and keep my covenant, then ye shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people, for all the earth is mine." And what did the people say? Did they say, no, we can't do it? They said, yes, Lord, all that you said, we will do it, We were saying, yes, we will do it. But, the thing is that, were they able to do it? Why not? Why were they not able to do it? Because they were doing it in their own strength. Yeah? So there's nothing wrong with the first covenant. The problem was that it was not based on the better promises, the promises of Christ. Because whenever we try to do things in our own strength and with our own wisdom, what happens? We fail. We fail. So God said in Hebrews 8 that he's going to establish a new covenant upon better promises. And those better promises are established upon what God will do through us. And that's what's important, that we try not to do things in our own strength. Now, this second covenant or new covenant is really the covenant of grace that Christ made with our first parents in Eden and renewed with Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. In other words, the gospel. And we'll see that it's the everlasting gospel. So it started off in Genesis, but it goes right through the whole entire Bible. Right in the middle of the Bible, we see here the mention of the everlasting covenant in Psalms 105. And we also see attached to this covenant, there's a land of Canaan and an inheritance. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. This land and inheritance and what God expects us to do with our inheritance. Again, we see this passing through the Bible right down to the book of Revelation. And we'll see there that when God's people were being persecuted, what did they do? They went into a land, okay, called the wilderness, and it says that the earth helped the woman being the church. Yeah, it helped the woman, and it swallowed up this flood. And we know this flood is coming again. All right, so we need to see the link between what we're doing now with our lives and how it's going to determine our future inheritance, which is the heavenly Canaan. So what does the Bible say about inheritance? Now, who's familiar with Abraham? Children, do you know who Abraham is? Yeah? What was Abraham's concern? What was his main concern? Sorry? He didn't have an heir, so he wanted a child. He didn't want to go childless. Yeah, that was his concern, because he realized that he wanted to pass something on, right? He wanted to pass something on down the generations. He didn't have an heir, so he was so concerned that he ended up having a child with Hagar. Now, in this promise, this covenant, God says to him, in the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. So God always wishes to bless his people with an inheritance. And that's key, because we cannot separate the covenant or the promise from a land. There's always a land ascribed to God's promises for his people. Okay, because we see it with Abraham. We also see it when God's church was in the wilderness and God gave them a land. Where was that land that God gave them that was a place of refuge for them? We saw in Revelation. What land did the pilgrims flee to? Exactly, so the US. So again, there was a land of promise. And we here, we're looking for a better land, right? Our eternal land, our eternal Canaan. So there's always land. God sees land as being so important for his people, because God is not just concerned with our spiritual blessings, but also our temporal. Is that right? God wants to bless his people, right? There's nothing wrong with being a Christian and having, a good piece of land, because that's what God has given you, right? And how we take care of it is very, very important. Now, who even remembers the story of Naboth? Not even the king himself could convince him to give up his land, right? Because he realized that he had to hold on to that and pass it down the generations. Right, so Hezekiah. Now we're moving on to the story of Hezekiah, and this is linked to the title of today's presentation. So in those days was Hezekiah sick unto death, and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, came unto him and said unto him, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. And what did Hezekiah do? Did he just say, okay, Lord, I accept this, I'm gonna just die? What did he do? He turned his face to the wall and he prayed and he asked the Lord for mercy. And what did God give him? 15 more years. Now we can all say, oh, but he kind of wasted those 15 years. What did he do? Ended up having Manasseh, and what happened to the children of Israel because of Manasseh's sins? But at the end of the day, when we are ill and God blesses us with more life, what should we be doing with it? Sorry? Putting our house in order. Amen. And it's not just, of course, the physical house, it's your spiritual condition as well. It's about your whole house, your whole household. Um, it says here in red that when the king was told to get his house in order, the term house was referring more to the household of the king and his personal affairs rather than the literal structure of the house, right? Okay, so obviously he wasn't concerned about the literal structure of the house, although he seemed to be when the Babylonians came to visit and he showed them everything in his house. And as a result, God said, okay, they're going to take you into captivity and everything that you've shown them, right? Okay, so and also most people might say, oh, I don't have much. But what did the widow do with her mite? She gave all that she had. So no matter how big or how small our estate may be, God has entrusted it to us, and we are to take care of it. In Luke 16:10, it tells us that he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. So then, what does the spirit of prophecy say about setting your house in order? When I was looking into this a few years ago, really, I was looking at Testimonies Volume 4, and Ellen White says so much about will writing and getting our house in order, making sure that we don't leave an undue burden upon our family members when we pass away. And she says there that in paragraph 482, that it often happens that an active businessman is cut down without a moment's warning, and on examination, his business is found to be in a most perplexing condition. Now, in the effort to settle his estate, the lawyer's fees eat up a large share, if not all, of the property, while his wife and children and the cause of Christ are robbed. Now, the reason why that often happens is because I see it all the time. I remember I had a case where a lady, she was very wealthy, she had a lot of farming land, and she hadn't been married, didn't have any children. So when she passed away, the relatives were very distant relatives, and they were very, very hard to find. So we had to do like a whole family tree, searching for relatives, getting evidence of their connection with this lady, and it went on for years. And, each time a lawyer does work, they charge for their time. And so really, if that lady just left a will, she could have left it all to charity even if she wanted to. But it would have saved so much money. And in the end, we had to even get insurance, because sometimes people come up years later saying, oh, I'm related to this person, and, I'm entitled to this. And each time somebody calls the office and says, oh, when is the money coming in? Because people are getting impatient. They don't know the lady from Adam, but they want their money, right? So each time they call the office, they're being charged for that. So it's eating out their inheritance as well, and sometimes they don't realize it. So we have to say to them, when we have more information, we'll call you, But obviously people get impatient when it comes to money. But it says there in blue that those who are faithful stewards of the Lord's mean will know just how their business stands, and like wise men, they will be prepared for any emergency. And, even as a lawyer, I look at this and I sometimes look at my own will and I think to myself, have I really done all that I can? Is it what I really want to happen when I pass away now, if I were to pass away now? So, what does 1 Timothy 5 verse 8 say? It says that if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith. And the reason why I'm bringing this out is because I think a lot of the time as Christians, we don't realize our obligation to Christ, to make preparation for our own household in life and also in death as well. And this was read by Sister Rianne as well, that a good man leaveth an inheritance to his children's children. So it's talking about grandchildren. So in wills, you can make provision for children that have not been born yet, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, just to make sure that the inheritance passes down the line faithfully to those who have not even been born yet. So what is a will? Okay, so we're talking about wills. Sorry. That's okay, it's fine. So what is a will? It's a legal document, yeah? And it can be oral in certain circumstances. That probably won't apply to anybody here. So that kind of would be like somebody was on service as a soldier, and they're about to die. They just made a will orally to say, everything goes to my wife and children or whatever else. But it expresses a person's wishes as to how their property is to be distributed after their death. It says about who will manage their property until it's finally distributed. It can talk about how you want your children to be cared for, who you want them to be cared for by, and also it can express your funeral wishes. The oral one, okay, so it's very, very limited, and you also have to have proof as well. Yeah, so it's not something that I would say anybody should rely upon, but so there's something called a privileged will. So if you're on active service in the army, for example, and you are on the battlefield and you haven't written a will, and you might say to one of your comrades, this is what I desire, I think I'm gonna die here, this is what I want to happen, but then that comrade has to survive as well and tell the story. So it's better for you to have your will in place first. Yes, exactly. It's always better to have everything in writing, yeah. So what makes a will valid? And you know what's interesting as well is that our legal system, believe it or not, is based upon the Bible. So what you see in making a will valid, you're going to see biblical principles here. So that means that we as Christians should be at the forefront with our wills, right? Because we know the Bible. So one of the things that we need to look at when we're looking at what the validity of a will is Section 9 of the Wills Act 1837. And this sets out the formalities for making a will. So I'm just going to break it down into simple terms for you. So first of all, you've got to have something called testamentary capacity, which means you must be over the age of 18 and have a sound mind. And the scripture that comes to mind with this is from 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, which you'll probably all be familiar with, where it says that God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Yeah? So that's the biblical principle there. The will must be in writing, right? So we don't want to be relying upon, and we can't really rely upon an oral will anyway, but it has to be in writing, it has to be written down. And in Habakkuk 2, verse 2 and 3, it said, the Lord answered me and said, write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision, so the vision really is like your will, what you see happening in the future for your family. And it says it's for an appointed time. We know the appointed time is death. But at the end, it's going to speak. When you can't speak, your will be speaking for you. Yeah, that's your testimony. What's your last letter of love to your family. And it says, although it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. If Christ doesn't come first, we're gonna die, yeah? And it's something which you don't like to think about. But I had a client the other day, and she said to me, and it's interesting because her father had passed away recently as well, and she said to me, you must not be a very nice job. And I said, actually, I actually really like writing wills, because this is the best part of my job, writing the wills, because, the client hasn't passed away. It's the probates that I don't really like, especially when you have widows, and especially those widows that have been left in a situation where the husband didn't write a will, she wasn't an owner of the property, she wasn't on the mortgage, and you hear some very sad stories where even mortgage lenders, they don't allow the mortgage to be transferred to the wife. They want them out of the house, and it can be quite as serious as that. So the will must be signed. And in Job 31:35, he says, oh, that I had one to hear me, here is my mark. Different versions put it differently, but a mark can actually be a signature in a will. If that's all you can do is just put a mark, you're that ill that you can't sign properly, it could just be a mark. And it says, here is my signature in the New International Version, making it clear that it is a signature. And then beautifully it says, here is my desire in the King James Version. Your desire, what you want to happen, will be, you have to have your signature there to show that you want it to happen. The will must be witnessed by 2 or more witnesses present at the same time. Now that's important. Now this biblical principle of there being 2 or 3 witnesses and that every word should be established, we often use this when we're doing proof text Bible studies. We bring all the scriptures together on a subject, and we're able to prove a point in the Bible. Same thing with a will. Yeah, there has to be 2 or 3 witnesses, or at least 2 witnesses, should I say, and they must be there at the same time. So you can't have a will that's signed by one neighbor, or you sign your will and then the neighbor comes in to witness it one day, and then another comes in the next day to witness it. No, all 3 persons have to be present at the same time. And the testator must know and approve the contents of the will. The testator is the person writing the will. And each time I do a will with my clients, I'll take their instructions, I will send them out a draft to make sure they're happy with it. I put the words in simple English, because sometimes some of the language in the will can be quite archaic. So I would always send an explanation letter to say this is what this means, are you happy with it? If you want to change it, change it. But even when they come to sign the will, I would go through it with them again, just to make sure that they understand what they're doing. And that's also a biblical principle. Yeah, it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and a good understanding have all they that do his commandment. So we have to make sure we understand what we're doing in a will, because it's going to stand the test of time. Yeah. So again, Sister White says that many are not exercised upon the subject of making their wills while they are in apparent health, but this precaution should be taken by our brethren. So apparent health, most of us here might say we're in apparent health. We don't know what condition we're actually in. Sometimes we could be ill and not know. Sometimes we could, have a condition that we're not aware of. But the key thing is that we are to do it when we believe we are in apparent health, not to wait. Because I've done deathbed wills. It's called a deathbed will because you go into a hospital and you're sitting by somebody's bedside and you're taking their instructions as they're about to be passing away within the next couple of days or hours or whatever it is. And they're not very nice situations to be in. You try to go in with a smile, but you can't help but feel the pain of the family members when you're sat by the bedside and you see like a son and you know that mum and dad is not going to make it for, the next month or whatever it is. And it's not a nice situation to be in. And then, wills should be made in a manner to stand the test of law. So one of the things that Sister White emphasizes that death will not come sooner because you've made your will. Some people feel that making a will would be like tempting fate or accepting that you're going to die. Rianne's laughing. Why are you laughing? I made my first will when I was 25, I think I was. Yeah, just after I got married, I was 25. And I made my first will, and I'm still alive now. I made another will about 15 years later. But the thing is, the second will was more difficult. And I'll tell you why it was more difficult, because I had children. And when you're thinking about your property and what's in your bank account, you don't really mind who spends your money when you haven't got children. I obviously wanted to make sure that my husband wasn't thrown out of the house and he had, he wasn't destitute or anything like that as well. But when you have children, you have to really think about this, because you have to think about guardianship. So I'm going to talk about that a bit later on, what guardianship is about. And that's very important, because your children, your family are your greatest assets, really. Now, what can invalidate my will? So you need to be aware of this, because there's some things that can make your will invalid or challengeable. You don't want your will to be challenged. So I'm making you aware of this now. You can put all of them up, so it's going to just flick through. Yeah, thank you, darling. So, lack of capacity. So I've touched on this before. Capacity basically means that you are aware of what you're doing. To be able to show legally that you're aware, you have to be over the age of 18 as well. And you've got a sound mind, yeah? So something else which is important, is something called duress or undue influence. So duress is basically when you're pressured to make a will, or not just a will, but anything. Duress is like you're putting pressure on the person. So in taking will instructions, I have to make sure that I see my clients on their own for that very reason. Because if you've got a situation where years down the line you have family members that have a conflict, and you have, for example, two children that don't get along, adult children probably, and they'll come along and they'll say, well, my brother Paul, I hope nobody here is called Paul, but my brother, he basically was influencing mum. He was always round that, you knew she was going to die, and he was always telling her, I love you, mum, and whatever it is. You probably did love mum, but the other brother's just jealous. So if I find, or if somebody finds that Paul was actually in the room when mum was writing the will, that could suggest undue influence if mum has left the majority of her estate to Paul, yeah? So I have to make sure that my clients are seen on their own. That can be difficult now, because a lot of wills are taken while somebody's at home. It's done over Teams or Zoom. So, and especially when you've got elderly parents who don't know how to set up the Zoom, so you kind of have to be a little bit lenient and say, you can set it up for mum, but you have to leave the room. I understand mum might not be very computer savvy, but you still can't be in the room. And if anything goes wrong, she'll call you. It's fine, So, destruction, you have to make sure the will doesn't look as though it's been tampered with in any way. So when I send out a will, I say to my clients, don't put any like paper clips on it when you're sending it back. Make sure that it doesn't look as though it's been damaged, because it can be questioned, later on down the line. Marriage also is very important. So marriage revokes a will. So if anybody is contemplating making a will and you're due to get married within a few months, always make your solicitor aware that you're going to get married, because once you get married, that will is invalidated. So it's cancelled. So that basically means you'd be dying intestate, and I'm going to show you what that can mean for you. You might not mind, but it's something to bear in mind, that if you're going to get married, if I know that you're going to get married and you tell me I'm getting married to a particular person within a few months, I would put a contemplation of marriage clause in your will to say that this will not become invalid because of my marriage to this person. It cannot be a generalized, I think I might get married in 5 years. You have to name the person that you're going to get married to in your will. And can my will be amended before or after death? I'm going to move on to the next one. Yes, sure. How is it? It's just legally, that's how it is. I think the reason why is because it's assumed that once you get married to somebody, you want them to have everything. Yeah, it is. It's a big assumption. So you don't want her to have everything? Sorry. Yeah, so it's assumed that, that I'll get around to writing a will, but anyway, I want her to have everything. So you were single all along, yeah, and then you met, the love of your life, and now you want to give everything to her and the children. So that's why it invalidates it. Yeah, because the law would actually define who's going to get it, and it will be the wife or the husband. And the reason why that can be a problem is because if it's a second marriage and you've got children from the previous marriage, they might be losing out on their inheritance altogether. So that's why it's important that if you know that you're getting married the second time and you've got children, that you have a will in place either just before or immediately after the marriage. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happens a lot. And because sometimes as well, I don't know why, but I don't want to pass judgment, but sometimes you get one spouse that goes and makes a will or comes to me and says, I want to make a will. And I say, well, does your husband want to make a will as well? Oh, he's not interested. Or sometimes it's like, well, has your husband got a will? I don't even know. So sometimes they don't discuss it in the household as well. Making a will can be like a taboo. So one person goes off and makes a will on their own, and then the other person doesn't even know that they've got a will. Yeah, it's not working. Okay. All right, so, okay, it's working now. Yeah. Okay, so can my will be amended before or after death? So in Hebrews 9:16 and 17 it says, for where a testament is, there must also of necessity be the death of the testator. For a testament is of force after men are dead. So that basically is telling me that your will not be enforced until you die. So until you die, you can change your will. Yeah? And then after death, yes. I gave this presentation a few weeks ago in Wales, and a lady, when I said to her that your will can be changed after you die, she kind of went, whoa, she was really shocked. It can be done by agreement. So something called a deed of variation, which is basically the persons that you left your estate to can agree amongst themselves to amend the will. So that's done by agreement. So say, for example, you've got like a higher rate taxpayer and they don't necessarily need the money. They're thinking, well, why don't I just give it to my son, who's also a beneficiary in the will, but wouldn't get it until I pass away. So they can actually give their inheritance to the child. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, so the beneficiaries have to agree. So that's called a deed of variation. So this is not something where there would be like a conflict, or there could be a conflict, but they finally agree. So like, for example, I had a situation where there was a second marriage, and the children of the deceased wasn't happy that the second wife was getting the house and other things. So she kind of backed down and said, well, it's okay, I'll just take, my share of the house and whatever, but I don't want the money. You just take the money, I'm not bothered. Because she didn't want any hassle with the children. She just gave them the money and she just took the house. So we kind of worked it out that way, whether you feel it's fair or not. Yeah. No. So the deed of variation, something would happen after you've passed away. You don't know obviously you wouldn't know anything about it. So they don't have to put a clause in the will. It's something which they come together afterwards and agree. So you don't have to. Yeah, so it's a deed. It's a separate document from the will, which is attached to the will. So you're going in and you're saying, say for example, you had clause 2 where you were left £10,000. You'd go in and you do a deed of variation. So you're varying the terms of the will to change it so that you'd only get £2,000 or whatever it is. Yeah, does that make sense? Yes. Yeah, so there are sometimes people put clauses in their will to say that if anybody in my will challenges my will, they are going to be disinherited altogether. Yeah, so sometimes people put that in. I must warn you that doesn't always work. Because the court kind of doesn't really like those kind of things going in wills, so that can even be challenged anyway. But yeah, sometimes people do that to put people off trying to change the will after they've passed away. Because sometimes you might be aware of the fact that there may be a conflict when you die, because none of our families are perfect, and there was always issues, So sadly, we live in a sinful world. And there's another thing as well that I'm going to bring up now. It's called the Inheritance Provision for Family Independence Act 1975. So if you feel that you should have been included in a will, or you're not happy with what you got in somebody else's will, you can actually challenge it, but you have to be within a certain class of people. And also, you've only got a limited time period to challenge the will. So you've got 6 months from when you get something called the grant of probate. So a grant of probate is when somebody passes away and they apply to the court for the right to administer the estate. So that happened it has to happen when you have a property in an estate, or if there's more than £5,000 in the estate. So you apply to the office of the probate office, you get the grant of probate. So up until 6 months from that being issued, you can challenge the will. Okay, if you feel that you should have been benefited in a different way, or you weren't benefited at all, then you can make an application to the court. Yeah. Yeah. So I've got some cases where you're kind of hoping, there's issues in the family, so you're kind of looking at the calendar and you're thinking, oh, I've got 1 week left. Hopefully we'll get through to the last week so that there's no challenges, because you don't really want that to happen, because then it's going to start eating at the money in the estate as well, which isn't very nice. Now, things to consider. Yes, darling. Yeah. No, you don't have to own a property. The only thing I would say, though, is if you do own a property, you definitely should, because you have to, when I just said about the probate, the grant of probate, you need to apply for that in order to deal with the property in the estate. And it's much easier when you have a will in place to do it. Yeah. Right, things to consider in drafting your will. You can just click down to guardianship, please. Okay, so actually go down to funeral wishes for me, darling. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to consider are executors. Executors are people that are going to be dealing with your estate until everything's distributed. So you're going to probably appoint somebody or you should appoint somebody who's trustworthy, somebody who can manage that kind of responsibility, and you can appoint up to 4 of them. You don't have to appoint them all to act together. You can do them as substitutes as well. So you could say, for example, that if my husband is alive, then he will do it. If not, then it will be the children, or niece, nephew, friend, whoever it is. Another thing you're going to want to maybe consider are legacies. So a legacy is basically a gift in your will. It can be monetary, it can be an item, and a legacy can also include charitable legacies as well. So if you want to give money to the church, for example, or to another charity, that will be classified as a legacy in your will. Now, trusts are something which you can use to help protect your bloodline. And the one I'm going to be looking at today is a lifetime interest trust. I'm going to go on to that shortly. Guardianship is very important because in your will, you can decide if both parents pass away, who will look after the children. Yeah, so that's something which you will be able to decide in your will as opposed to it going to a court situation. Pets. So any of us that have pets, we can make provision for our pets in our will. Are we smiling about that? Huh? Yeah, it's real. Okay, so you might want to leave like a sum of money. No, because imagine you've got, I have pets as well, right? I live in the country, so it's necessary to have pets in the country. So when you have pets, obviously you know your pet, it costs money, vet bills, they need to be fed. And when you die, they're still going to be there. So you might want to leave a sum of money to take care of them. You might want to give them to somebody to look after. And you can actually do that. You can even say, I leave, say, £500 to my niece on the basis that she will use it for the benefit of my kittens or whatever it is. Yeah? Okay, and then your residue, always think about your residue. What are you going to do with whatever's left over? Right, so that's your residue. After all the bills have been paid and, you know, any tax that's due, funerals paid off, whatever's left over, who's going to get it? You're going to divide it equally between the children? Is it all going to go to charity? But always have a residue clause in your will. Yeah, so we know what to do with the little last bits that are left over. And then lastly, funeral wishes. Now, I know sometimes we all will have these desires about how we're going to be buried. Some people do, some people don't. You can make it as elaborate as you want to. You can even attach like a letter to your will to say, this is exactly what I want to happen for my funeral, just so that people know what your desires are. Okay, so a lifetime interest is basically, I want to touch on this now because sometimes there's two situations where this is most relevant. First of all, you've got a situation where you're getting quite nearing to going into retirement or whatever else, and you own your property. Now, there's two ways in England to own your property as joint owners. You can own it as a joint tenant, or you can own it as tenancy in common. So as joint tenants, you have a right of survivorship. So say, for example, husband and wife own a property, wife passes away, the property automatically transfers to the surviving spouse, the husband. Okay, the whole property just goes to them. You don't have to leave it in your will. In fact, you can't leave it in your will because it's got a right of survivorship. Tenancy in common is different. So you have a divided share. You could be 50-50, could be 75-25, whatever you want to choose. And so if I own, say, 50% of my property, my husband owns 50%, and I pass away, what's going to happen to the remainder? What you can do is you can do something called a lifetime interest. So I would give my husband the right to stay in my property until he passes away. So I'm not actually giving him the property. He's just got a lifetime interest. So he can stay in the property, and then when he passes away, then it goes to the children. Okay, it's a way to protect the bloodline. So even if, for example, he goes and remarries, my children will not be disinherited because he doesn't own my 50% share. Okay, so it's protected for the children. You can also do that. Some people are doing this as well for protection in terms of care home fees as well, because if you don't own the whole property, they can't take the whole property for the local authority. So, but you have to be careful. A little caveat there is be careful, because sometimes people do it deliberately to get around this issue of care home fees, and it can become quite obvious. So say if you're like 65, 75 and you're not well, and you think, oh, let's just, because it can actually change from a joint tenancy to a tenancy in common. It doesn't have to stay as a joint tenancy. So you can do something called a severance of the joint tenancy, where you divide it later on down the line. And I'll just warn you, if you do that, and then you go into care, say a year later, the local authority will probably say, the reason why you decided to do it is because you knew you were going into care, and it was a deliberate means of depriving the local authority of their money. So I'm actually going to take into we are going to take into consideration the whole value of the property, not just 50%. So it doesn't always work, so you have to be careful as well. So a letter of wishes, what is it? So a letter of wishes can be very important. Remember I spoke to you earlier about where you have, so what is it? So letter of wishes is basically where you write your reasons your reasons for why you have taken a certain course in your will. So I'll give you an example. You've got a child that's estranged and you don't want to leave them anything in your will. More than likely, I warn you, that child will probably come up once you passed away and want some sort of inheritance. So what you do is you write something called a letter of wishes and you attach it to your will to say, these are the reasons why I haven't left any money or any inheritance to this child, or I've left less. And that's like your voice from the grave then. So if it goes to court and they challenge you under the act that I was speaking about before, that can be used as evidence to say that that person was in no way dependent upon me, because they have to prove that they were dependent upon you. And if you haven't seen them for 20 years, it'd be hard to prove it. So you put it in writing. These are the reasons why we've chosen not to give our son a share of the home or whatever it is. Yes, that makes sense? Okay, so just to finalise, your will is your last letter of love to those dearest to you. It is a way of communicating your thoughts and desires for your family and friends at a time that they will need it most. So that's what I like to encourage my clients with. That it's actually like a love letter, just like the Bible's a love letter. You know, when somebody's passed away and they're very close to you, and you look at their will and you think, wow, you know, they were thinking of me. All those years ago when they wrote their will, they were thinking of me. You know, it's kind of comforting. You know, nothing brings the person back, but just to know that they thought about you can be very comforting. And I remember when I looked at my grandfather's will, and to be honest with you, I wasn't very close to him in the latter part, in fact, most of his life, really. But he was a very principled man, and his will was very elaborate, and he left something for everybody, you know. All the grandchildren got something, so I thought that was beautiful to think that I didn't really see him very much, but yet still, he still thought about me, so, you know. That was nice. So what do I lose through an intestacy? An intestacy is when you do not write a will, yeah? So basically you're losing the power to choose who your executors are. Yeah, remember what executors are? The people that decide or deal with your estate. Who will benefit from your estate, obviously. Whether your estate may fall into the hands of the crown. Now, whoa, nobody wants that to happen, right? Is the crown rich enough? Yeah? Whether your estate may fall into the hands of creditors. And when someone dies with no will or known family, their property passes to the crown as ownerless property. And, you know, we don't really want that to happen, because, again, that can cause a lot of costs as well, because you can actually recover the estate. You can actually make an application to say that it was actually me that should have got the money and not the Queen or the King. But you don't really want to do that, yeah? So, in an intestacy, the law decides who will benefit from your estate. So it's something called clearing off. So it's like a pecking order, and it goes down a line of family members. So at the top of the line, as you'd imagine, would be the spouse. So anything over 270,000, if you've got children, would go to the children and the spouse equally, so 50-50. So if you've got a property that's worth 250, for example, everything would just go to the spouse. Yeah. Then after that, so the first person in the line would be surviving spouse or civil partner. Then it goes down to the children. If there's any children and everything goes to the children, everything stops there, or the children get everything. And then if not, it would be parents. Then it would be brothers or sisters of the whole blood, and then brothers or sisters of the half blood. And that can be quite significant in some circumstances, because some of us have brothers and sisters which the law would classify as half brothers and half sisters. But we may not see them as our half-brothers and half-sisters. We may just see them as our family. And so those half-brothers or sisters will be treated differently from somebody who has the same mum and dad as you. Yeah, so if you don't have a will, bear that in mind. And then it will go down to grandparents. Then again, uncles or aunties of the whole blood, and then half-blood. Again, they make that distinction. I don't know I can't even think which ones of my aunties and uncles are half-blood and whole blood. I haven't really thought about it. So, you know, things like that. Sometimes you don't even know, because, you know, sometimes in our families, parents don't talk about whose parents are whose parents. But, yeah, so things like that. If you don't make that decision yourself, the law will make that decision for you. And then, this is important for us, consider God's plan. Let it ever be kept in mind that the present selfish system of disposing of property is not God's plan, but man's device. Now, as Adventists, we are called to be reformers. Yeah, we're called to be repairers of the breach. In everything that we do, we should be doing it differently from the world. And it says even Christians should be reformers and break up this present system, giving an entirely new aspect to the formation of wills. And I thought, wow, I didn't even think that would be an area of reform, but it is, because it's stewardship. You know, how we manage God's property is very important. Let the idea be ever present that it is the Lord's property which we are handling, which you are handling. Again, that's important. Remember the story of Naboth? He wouldn't give up his inheritance even for the king. Yeah? We are to be good stewards of God's property. The will of God in this matter is law. If man had made you the executor of his property, would you not closely study the will of the testator, that the smallest amount might not be misapplied? Your heavenly friend has entrusted you with property and given you his will as to how it should be used. If this will is studied with an unselfish heart, that which belongs to God will not be misapplied. So the Lord's cause, it says, is shamefully neglected. When he has provided men with sufficient means to meet every emergency, if they only had grateful, obedient hearts. So that's why it's important, because we're coming to a time now when we know we're close to the end of time. Yeah, nobody can deny it. Even before the whole coronavirus thing, you know, we were kind of getting a bit anxious and we're thinking, oh, the Lord's coming soon, but it's even more blatant now. So everything that we have, you need to be thinking that this money is going to be needed for the Lord's cause. There's going to be a time when we're going to have to sell everything that we have. And so if we don't manage our property properly now, when it's needed to do the work, and it is needed now even, you know, we won't be able to use it for that purpose. And God will hold us accountable for that. So lifetime planning. So we've looked now at wills. What can we put in place whilst we are alive? Because we're still living. All of us here are alive by God's grace. Amen? Yeah? Now smile and be happy about that, right? So what can we do now? Because our wills, okay, we can do our wills and put them to one side and think, oh, this is going to come up later on in the future, but not now. So what can we do now? Lifetime planning. Declarations of trust. I mentioned about declarations of trust before. It's basically a document where you can actually say, I'll give you a simple example to make it practical. You're buying a property and with a partner or a spouse, and you are investing a certain pot of money, but you're doing it in unequal shares. Yeah. So one person puts in the whole, say for example, the whole deposit for the house, and you want to make sure that when that property is sold, that you get your deposit back. So you can do a declaration of trust to say, I contributed 40,000, 80,000, and when the property is sold, I want to have that money back, and then the remainder will be split 50-50. You can do it like that. You can even help your children out if you're buying a property. If they're buying a property, you want to help them, but you know you don't want to be too generous. So you say, you know, I'll put my investment in for you. I want to see you doing well in life. So you put that investment in, and then at the end, you know, you can get it back when they can afford to pay you back. So it's a way to give another person a financial benefit in respect of a property that you may own, and it can be very good for tax purposes as well. Because you could even buy a property. I know I've heard of situations where a child might be going off to university and they're going to another city, so the parents buy a house because they can afford to in that city, and they rent it out as a student accommodation, allow their child to live in the house, and then their friends are living in the house as well, and then the rental income, 90% of that goes to their child, yeah, and 10% to them. So when they're doing their tax bill, all they have to account for is that 10%, and then it's a benefit to the child as well because they've got an income, so you can do it that way. Okay, another one we're going to look at now are powers of attorney, lasting powers of attorney. Now, why would I want to give somebody the power to act on my behalf? There's a few reasons. So you've got sickness, old age. These are just some things. Incapacity. It could be a matter of convenience. For business purposes. Now, you're basically saying that somebody else can act as though they are me. All right, so that's basically what it is. So you could be doing it because you're not well. You could be doing it because you're getting old and you're not so mobile. You could do it for business purposes. You might have property abroad, and whilst you're aware, you want somebody to manage your bank accounts for you. You could do it for that reason. You can do it for religious reasons as well, just to make sure that if you go into hospital, for example, that your religious convictions are taken into account. So this is called a lasting power of attorney. Now, can this concept be found in the scriptures? Yes, it can. You know, Christ said that in John 14:12 that he was given this authority to his disciples. He said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also." So he was giving them that authority to act on his behalf. Yeah, and then if we look at even the situation with Christ and his Father in heaven, whatsoever you shall ask in my name, that will I do, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. So that's like giving somebody the power to act in somebody else's name. Now, there are two types of lasting power of attorney. You've got health and welfare, and you've got financial decisions and property. Now, both have to be registered with the Office of the Public Guardian, and they both require mental capacity to be valid. So you have to have mental capacity at the time when you're making the power of attorney. Now, even way back in Ellen White's time, you know, she'd given somebody a power of attorney. So this is an ancient concept, really. She said here, or it said here, that Myron Cornell's solid reputation and administrative ability no doubt explain why, in 1897, Ellen White gave Cornell the power of attorney to care for her business affairs in Michigan. All right, so I found that and I thought that was interesting. I put that in there because it's important that she chose somebody with solid reputation and administrative ability. So when you're thinking about appointing somebody to be your attorney, you need to consider that as well. Because they're going to be making decisions as if they're you, and can you trust that person? You know, it needs to be somebody that you can trust that's going to do what you would want to do. So, as I said before, there are two types. The first one I'm going to discuss is a health and welfare one. Now, the donor is the person that's making the power of attorney, giving somebody the right to act on their behalf. And you can appoint up to 4 attorneys. And you can give the power to act jointly or jointly and severally. So if you've got 4 people, I always recommend that you give them the power to act jointly and severally. That basically means they can all act together on a decision or they can act individually. So it's a bit more useful because you don't want to have a situation where you've got a financial one and they all have to go to the bank at the same time to draw out £10 or £20 or whatever it is, yeah? And then you need to have it witnessed. So the power of attorney, you can do it in your own home, yeah? Or you can do it in the office, but it has to be witnessed. The attorney's signature and the donor's signatures have to be witnessed. And you also have to have a certificate provider. Now, that is somebody that testifies that you as the donor know what you're doing. Yeah, and that person can be, it could be me as a lawyer, it could be a doctor, it could be, but it has to be somebody, if it's not a professional person, that has known you for at least 2 years, and they cannot be connected to you or your attorney in any way. And attorneys can only act when you lose mental capacity in terms of the health and welfare power of attorney. So up until when you can't speak for yourself, nobody else can go to the doctor and say, no, I want this to happen, they need to have an operation. That's not going to happen. Yeah, it's only when you can't speak for yourself. But it has to be in place before you reach that decision, before you reach that point. So you can't have a stroke, for example, and then your family, you can't communicate with you and they decide to get a power of attorney. It's too late then. They have to do something else called a deputyship, which is very much more, it's more expensive, it's more onerous. It costs a lot of money to make the application in the first place, and then they have to file reports every year. Now, this is very important. Now, Section 5 of the Power of Attorney application talks about life-sustaining treatment. Do you know what that means? What life-sustaining treatment might be? It can be different in the circumstances. So say, for example, if you had pneumonia, it could even be antibiotics. If you were a cancer patient, for example, it could be an operation. You know, so whatever it is, it's going to sustain your life. That's basically what it is. So there's 2 options here. You've got option A and option B. It's very small, so it's hard to see, but I'll just explain it to you. So when you're filling out the form, you're going to say whether you're going to give your attorneys the right to make those decisions or you're going to give it to the medical professionals. Yeah, and that's why this part is very important. Consider it. Do you want it to be a situation where, I know this became more important, I think, during the time of COVID, because family members were turning up at the hospital and they were being turned away. And even after COVID, even now, you know, sometimes doctors, I'm not saying doctors to make bad decisions, they don't, but I'm just saying that sometimes you want your family to make the decision about what's going to happen at the end of your life, not the doctor. And if you don't have I'm coming to you, brother. If you don't have a power of attorney in place, the doctors will make the decision, not your family. Yeah? Say that again. Can't hear you.
Yes, I was going to ask.
Yes.
In places where the family member says, do not resuscitate, if the patient says, do not resuscitate, can that remain standing or do
are you talking about if they put it in their notes? You mean if they put it in their notes?
If they, yes.
If they put it, normally they respect the wishes of the, when it comes to something like that, I mean, it can happen, but I think normally they would respect that. The doctors, that kind of decision, they would normally do that. But I can't really guarantee. That's why these kind of things are better to have in place, just to make sure. I mean, it could even be something simple like you want to go home at the end of your life, just to die at home. And sometimes they can be quite funny about things like that. So once you have a power of attorney in place, because I know some people have come to me and said, oh, this is after they've taken out the power of attorney, and they say, oh, you know, at the end of granddad's life or grandma's life, having the power of attorney in place was just so valuable to us as a family, because, you know, they were making all the decisions for us and we didn't like it, and then as soon as we took out the power of attorney, they kind of had to stand back, you know, so it can be very useful, because remember that, you know, at the end of somebody's life, it's very, very traumatic for the family already, and very emotional, so you want to be able to make those decisions based upon what you know your family member would have wanted. Yeah? Does that answer the question? Yeah?
What if
All right, so say an individual is ill and could possibly die.
Yeah.
And the person says to the medical team, I do not want to be resuscitated, peradventure I die. Does a lawyer have to do any form of conversation, have a conversation with that person, or it doesn't need any form of legal?
Well, this is basically what the power of attorney would do. So having the power of attorney in place, you can have there's a section on there where you can have your wishes put in. So all the kind of things that you would desire, things like, you know, going into care at the end of my life, this is what I want to happen. So that's where you'd have that in place to be used at that point.
Okay.
If it's an accident on the street, you mean in terms of whether you're going to be resuscitated or not? I think what happens in unusual situations, what happens is that in the hospital, the doctors always try to do the best to save your life. But there are some people that don't want to be resuscitated. And I've had people that come to me with a power of attorney and they say, put that in my power of attorney. I do not want to be resuscitated. So I can't really say. It depends on what hospital you go to or how they practice. I don't really know much about what happens in the actual hospital situation. All I know is that when you have a power of attorney, that's when you can actually use that as a tool. Does that answer the question? Yeah? Okay. Okay, so financial decisions. This is the second part. So you choose whether your attorneys can act when you have capacity or when you lose capacity. So it can be a situation where you say, I don't want anybody to make any financial decisions for me when I can make it for myself. It kind of is a bit pointless in a sense, because you can use this when you have mental capacity but you're not physically able to do things. So it's kind of better to leave it open, I think, really. So without an LPA, who makes the decisions about my health? The doctors or the medical professionals? You might be completely happy with that, and that's fine. The local authority, so decisions about going into care, the local authority will decide whether or not you should go into care in some situations. It could be a deputy appointed by the Court of Protection. So if you are seen to have somebody in your family who has limited capacity or lost capacity altogether, then the Court of Protection might step in and make decisions for them. Now, with an LPA in place, who makes the decisions? It's basically you or your attorneys acting in your place in good faith, really. Now, there are proposed changes to lasting powers of attorney, which is why I'm going to. Okay, we're nearing the end now, but I just want to just bring this out because the LPA system is kind of changing, or it will be changing. At the moment, it's very private. It's something you can do in your own home. You can appoint a solicitor to do it for you. And I'll explain the reason why you might want to appoint a professional is because if you make a mistake, each time you make an application for this, you have to pay the Office of the Public Guardian. And there's sometimes when you make a mistake on the form, they'll send it back to you and say you have to do it again, and then you have to pay again for the application fee. And they don't even tell you why, which can be really expensive if you have to do it 3-4 times. Whereas if a solicitor does it for you, even if there's a mistake, so say for example, with a power of attorney, you can't have somebody as your witness who's a family member, sorry, a certificate provider. And I had a situation where there was a very common surname, and the person making the power of attorney had the name, the certificate provider had the same name, and I sent a letter explaining this, but because there were two people, husband and wife, it was attached to the husband's power of attorney but not to the wife, so they rejected the wife's one, and I was kind of like, well, why? And they said, oh, because of the name. And I said, but I sent a letter. And they said, oh, sorry, it wasn't attached to the second power of attorney. But if it had been somebody in the public, they wouldn't have explained that to them. They would have sent it back and said, oh, you have to do it again. And they probably would have done the same thing again, sent it off with the same person, and had to pay the money again and have it rejected a second time. So, which I think is terrible, you know? So, but at the moment, like I was saying, it's very private. You can do it in your own home now. It's coming a time, I believe, when our freedoms are going to be very, very restricted. And when I look at some of the changes that they're proposing for lasting powers of attorney, I can see it there. At the moment, basically what they're trying to say is that anybody can object to your lasting power of attorney with the new proposals. And it can be done even before you made the application. So your neighbor, for example, could object to your power of attorney. They're going to be proposing ID checks on the donor, the certificate provider, and possibly the attorneys. At the moment, they don't do all of that. So it's they're kind of taking control out of the donor's hands, really. So all these things we need to be aware. Whilst we have the opportunity to do these things, let us do it now. Yes, brother. No, carry on. Yeah, I'll finish. Yeah. You can go to the next one, darling. Yeah.
No, I will leave it till the end.
You leave it to the end?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay, so the reason why I'm bringing this out now, just to summarize, is that we are approaching a time now where we're seeing an increase in deaths. Does anybody agree with that? Yeah? Okay. Anybody in the medical profession here? Anybody in the medical profession here? No? Anybody that works in a funeral home? Yeah, because before it was, you know, the funeral homes were like yelling and saying, oh, we've got so many people dying. I'm seeing it in my profession now because I'm seeing that probates are taking so much longer. Even to pay for inheritance tax, I'm waiting for months for them to come back to me. And I'm like, what's going on, you know? But this article from BHF Press said that nearly 100,000 more deaths involving heart conditions and strokes than usual since the pandemic began. Okay, and this is serious because they're saying over 500 additional deaths a week involving cardiovascular disease. This is a wake-up call in terms of us how we, our lifestyle, yeah. Our lifestyle is, we're given a health message for a reason, and whether we want to accept it or not, God has done it because he loves us and he wants the best for us. So all of that, we need to be thinking about that, but at the same time realizing that the environment that we're living in as well is changing. You know, we need to think about where we are placing ourselves as well, because there's just so much disease and living crowded together. We talk about house to house. You know, we need to be thinking about where we are placing ourselves in the last days and how we are taking care of our health. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because as Adventists, we want to be the head and not the tail. We want to be wise. Yeah, God has given us wisdom for a reason, and we are to use it for our benefit. At the beginning, I was talking about like inheritance, and God talks about, you know, how he's going to bless his people. The blessings that we have are in the Bible and the spirit of prophecy. Those are the blessings that God has given us, and we are to use it for the good of ourselves and our family members. So when we see these things happening, we are to look up. You know, you can go to the next slide. This is what the world is telling us, okay? There's been an increase in deaths in those aged 30 to 59, and that's why I brought this out in an AY program, because it's not so much the older generation that is passing away, it's the younger ones, because I get a lot more phone calls now from children. I call them children because they're like in their 20s, but they're not, they're young adults, and their parents have passed away and they're in their 50s, and they don't know what to do, because they're not expecting that to happen. They're at university or wherever else, and mum or dad has passed away, and what do? I've never dealt with death before. And it's very, very hard. It's very, very touching for me, because I'm thinking, you just want to hug them and comfort them. But a lot of times when somebody dies young, they don't have a will in place as well, and that makes it even more difficult for the family. So young people need to be aware that these things need to be considered earlier on in life. Now, in the UK, sadly, in the age 45 to 54 range, only 35% have wills in place. You find that as people get older, they're more likely to have a will. But on average, in the UK, most people don't have wills in place. Yeah, so it's something that we really need to be thinking about. In fact, in the statistics, it says that even 62% have not even thought about making a will. Yeah. So as I was saying about probate delays, it's funny, I had situations where, probate solicitors are getting very, very annoyed with how slow things are, but we are to see that God is coming back soon, and God is helping us to realize that His coming is soon, and we need to think about our internal inheritance. So in the Bible it says that, in Luke 21, 25 to 28, it says, "And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear." Are we seeing that now? That's exactly what the news is saying, that men's hearts are failing them for fear and for looking on those things which are coming on the earth. It's the things that are happening that are causing men so much stress and fear. Mental health in this country is gone through the roof. Everybody seems to have a mental problem now, in one way or another, whether it's just not being able to manage stress daily, or whether it's a severe condition that they're suffering with. But it's becoming very prevalent. But what does the Bible say? When these things begin to pass, what are we to do? Look up, because our redemption draweth nigh. And God is a mighty, mighty number. I looked at Exodus, after the pandemic, I was looking at Exodus 2020, the year of the pandemic. What does God say? "And Moses said unto the people, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that this fear, or his fear, may be before your faces, that you sin not." I believe that was a turning point for most of us. It wasn't a time to be fearful, but God was doing it to prove us, to see whether or not we realize that it's a time for repentance, a time for putting away of sin completely out of our lives, and for looking up to Jesus Christ. So finally, who then is a wise and faithful steward? Luke 12, 42 to 43. "And the Lord said, Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make ruler over his household, to give their portion of meat in due season? Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing." And if you take away nothing from today, I want you to just take away this, that inheritance in terms of what we have on this earth is important. God is proving us, in a sense, really, to see how we're going to manage what we have here. Because if we can't manage what we have here, we're not going to be able to be entitled to what God has got in store for us in heaven. But, our land here is basically a reminder or a forefront for what we're going to be inheriting in the eternal kingdom if we make it. By God's grace, we're all striving to get there. And in Revelation 21, John sees this new heaven coming down as a bride adorned for her husband. And that's where our goal should be. Our mind should be set on, inheriting Canaan, our heavenly Canaan. And whatever we're doing now, the decisions that we're making now, it's preparing our minds to how we're going to receive or not receive that eternal inheritance. I want to just read a scripture. It's from Acts 20, verse 32, and it says, "And now, brethren, I commend you to God and to the word of his grace, which is able to build you up and to give you an inheritance among all them which are sanctified." Amen. So sanctification is a process. We know it's a daily process. And the decisions that we're making now are sanctifying us, you know. And God is merciful. Every day he gives us an opportunity to wake up and to make wise decisions. And we're all hoping that in the end God will say to us, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Thou hast been faithful over a few things. I will make thee ruler over many things. Enter thou into the joy of thy Lord. Now, who here wants the Lord to pronounce that upon them, that blessing? Amen. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. If anybody has any questions, I'm willing to take those now.
Yeah, let me go first.
Yes.
I understand how important it is for us to have wills. As I said to my wife some time ago, if you own nothing, you have nothing to give. And God loves a cheerful giver. So it is expected that you should own something. You understand the concept?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're expected to own something to give. There are a few things I want to ask about, but not to bore you with a lot of details. But as it concerns will, the preparation of our house, and the second coming of Christ, is it important? Is it necessary for us to have wills? Why is it necessary for us to have wills?
Okay, that's a very good question, because I think that a lot of the time we kind of ask those kind of questions because we're thinking, oh, Christ is coming soon, so why do I need to have a will? You know, why should I be buying a property? Why should I be doing this? Why should I be doing that? But we are still here. God tells us to occupy till I come, and anything that we have now is given to us for trust.
Yes.
And we are always thinking about what we're going to use it for.
Yes.
So if I, for example, if I don't write a will, one of the things that I probably didn't bring it out in one of the slides, but we are supposed to be reformers in how we do our wills. So sometimes we would want to give money to people that are like relatives, and just because they're relatives, we're giving them the money, yeah? But we wouldn't necessarily give it to them when they're alive because they waste it and squander it. Yeah, so if we have a will in place, we're thinking that even when I die, I want this money to go to the cause of God. Because at the end of the day, everything costs money. So when we're thinking about the fact that Christ is coming soon, what are we using that money for? You know, and a will can do that. It can actually determine. I mean, even if in the times of Ellen White as well, when she was talking about this, they were thinking that Christ was coming back in a few years' time. And if it was important in those times, it's even more important now because we're closer now, you know. So if that was important then, everything that we're doing now, every decision that we're making, we are to put it in line of the third angel's message and the fact that we have a work to do. And those times they were selling their houses, you know, they were giving everything to the cause of God. And if I know that I'm going to die, I want to make sure that my money is going to do the furtherance of the gospel when I'm not around to do it myself.
Yes.
So in answer to that question, I would say yes, definitely. Because Christ is coming soon, have a will.
Yes, I'm so happy that we looked at that perspective because,
Yeah.
you know, while you were here speaking and sharing, you know, the importance of having a will, and it definitely is a biblical principle.
Yeah.
And we know that the courts adopt, or those who wrote the policy and will adopted a great number of Christian principles in it. But there is a divergence, and this is why I ask the question, because sometimes, especially as Seventh-day Adventists, our minds become distracted
Yes.
from the truth in Seventh-day Adventists having wills. And so what we do at times, we will, like some will have properties. While they're alive, they were not making the sacrifice to God.
Yeah.
And when death time comes, or they write the will, that when they die, this should go to the Lord.
Yeah.
But it is not something God is pleased with.
Exactly.
Because he says, while you're alive and could have used that to do my will,
Yeah.
I am a second thought.
Yeah.
So you leave it until you die. Another issue is that some leave it, as Solomon in the book of Ecclesiastes says, you do not know who will come after you. So a man acquire all this wealth in life, and then he leaves it to a wicked man.
Yeah.
And what we must understand about the great controversy and why this program, I've listened to it, is very important, because it's not just about generational wealth and you're passing on wealth from one family member to another. It's not just about that.
No, it's not.
It's much, much greater, because we have Satan, who is a thief. He says he comes to kill, steal, and destroy. And as Seventh-day Adventists, as we near the time of Christ, if we do not manage God's will personally, and Satan is robbing us, some of us now, I'm telling you. He has some sneaky, wily way. He's robbing and he's setting us up that when a certain time comes, we'll be robbed of everything that we could have used in the cause of God. Yeah. It will be too late. We will run out in the streets casting dust on our head and crying, whoa, 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 because we did not pay attention in appropriating our will properly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that out. It's such an important point. And even the point about how some people, or some of us may want to wait until we die to then give money to the gospel, to the cause of the gospel. God, like you said, God is not pleased with that, you know? Yes, brother Mark.
Oh, sorry, before I pass, I was just going to say to everyone on the live stream, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we will read them out and answer them here. Yes.
Oh, yeah. Just want to add to what was said as well, is that God is a God of order. And we are stewards. Do everything to the glory of God. Whatsoever we eat, whatsoever we drink. But also, a will is sort of like a reflection of who the person really was. So I remember when my father died, everything was written down in order. Everything was written down. How his funeral would go. Even he wrote his eulogy. Everything. He wrote everything. How his estate was going to be divided. And the process was so comforting, even though it was a time of grief. The process was so easy. And that's what my father was when he was alive. He was a man of order. He was a man who would write things down. And listening to the presentation now, I'm realizing that it's a reflection really of who the person is. And the point that was made, I really agree with it, is that we are to handle God's estate wisely and make sure it's passed on to individuals who will be who are good stewards. Like Ellen White says that she made, was it Cornell? To handle her business because he was a man of what?
Solid reputation.
Solid reputation, and he was what?
Business acumen.
Yes. So in passing on our estate, we are to think carefully, I believe, of how we are going to pass on what we had. That, you know what I mean? So I think that it's not something to ignore. But I believe that it's something that we should carefully think about.
Time, just something my brother said about the wisdom in pass, the executor. Yeah. There is a within the general conference. There is a section that deals with, I don't quite remember what it named, but those of us who are interested, we pass our properties into the care of the general conference, and then they oversee, and within that will they oversee the taking care of your family. But at the end of it, because you have passed the will, you have passed the property onto them, they also are the executors of over what portion of it can be used in ministry. Okay. Yes.
All right. So, how much does it cost to make a will?
How much does it cost to make a will? Yeah, so I'll discuss with you how much I would charge, not now, but I can discuss with you. I can just tell you generally how much it costs to make a will. So wills range from, I'd probably say maybe about 80 to maybe £500. It depends on how complicated the will is and who's drafting it. So you have will writers that write wills and they're quite cheap, but they're not necessarily qualified solicitors, so they can't actually advise you on the will. they'll just be able to draft it for you. So you basically have to tell them what you want, and then they put it in. But you have somebody who's qualified to advise you, they'll charge you more. And then also if it's like a trust will, then it's more expensive as well. So it depends on what kind of will you're going for. Yeah.
It was just something you said. I don't know if you already covered this, but what's the difference between the will and a trust will?
Okay, so wills can be very basic. So you could be having a will where you're basically giving everything to a spouse or everything to your children. A trust will, you can start off with like a lifetime interest, could be a trust will, that could be classified as a trust as well, because you're not actually giving it to somebody, it's being held in a trust until it goes on to somebody else. You could have more complicated trusts in your will as well, so it really depends. It's basically you're not giving property directly to a person, it's kind of being held in limbo in a sense, yeah.
All right, so we have a question from the live stream here, and they're asking, if someone wishes to will all their money to the church and nothing was left to their children, can they contest it, or can the church give the children something?
Okay, so they can leave everything to the church, yeah, and then the children can contest it as well, because I remember I mentioned earlier about the Inheritance Act, Dependence and Inherit Dependence Act. So basically, if a child feels that they were given everything to the church, the parent gave everything to the church, and they shouldn't have done that, maybe because of capacity, or they feel as though they should have been provided for because they're dependents, they can challenge it. In those circumstances, of course, the church can decide to say, okay, we'll vary the will and we will give something to the children, so they can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? No?
Yeah. As well, I call myself a child of God because
Yeah.
I've always been a Christian. But my husband wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
and he has outside children before I met him.
Yeah.
Well, when I met him after about 2 years, I decided it's best to own my own property rather than paying rent. So I mentioned it to him, and his decision was he doesn't want a property because he's not interested,
Mm-hmm.
because he's here a long while and he never did. So I said whatever to him, and I said to him, well, you can stay, I'll do my own thing. So
Yeah. Can you put your mic up a little bit for me?
yes, so I went to my older sister and I mentioned it to her, and she was a bit impressed with because I'm young, and she didn't thought maybe as a young person I would have that knowledge. So I asked her to look around for me, and I will look around. So I was working at the hospital, but it was my day off that evening. So those days you have to use the phone that you pay for in the property where you live. So the phone call came in, and it was my sister who she sent her son to the shop, and he saw something in the estate agent. So he told his mom, so she rang me. So straight away, I used to save money and hide it away from my husband because I was taught to do that by my aunt who brought me up, you know what I mean? So anyway, I took out some money and I was living in Battersea at the time because I moved from Brockley to Battersea because of him. So I turned off the cooker and I went to Clapham Junction, and I got the train to Lewisham area where I live and where my sister live, and I she took me to the estate agent, and he asked the estate agent, gentleman asked me if I'm working, and I told him how many jobs I'm doing and whatever. And he asked me if I'm married. I said yes, and he said to me, what about my husband? So I explained to him what my husband had said, and he said, what you're earning, you can pay your mortgage. Don't worry, I'm a man, but I understand some man doesn't want to move forward. So if you want to move forward, you carry on.
Yeah.
So I go ahead, and I deposit on the property, and he went and he took me to the place and showed me. So it was not such a, it was sort of holy on the older side, but I know that I can do it room by room and whatever. So I go ahead and do what I was doing. And then along the line, he said I should pay all the bills and do the repair, and he would pay the mortgage, because we used to pay it together.
Yeah.
But then after a while down the line, I realized, no, I don't think that's a good decision. So I said to him, no, we'll go back and pay together. So he said, no. So I didn't want an argument, because you want peace in your marriage. So anyway, I pay all the bills, and I get all the carpenter to do all the work and everything like that, and whatever. He doesn't know anything like that, because it's afterward I put his name on the property, to be honest. He didn't join with me, so I do it on my own. And then when he came in one night, long ages after, but paper didn't get through altogether, so he said, I thought he was trying to wake me up to go to his sister Pusheen. I don't know if you know what called Pusheen. So anyway, I said, don't mention it to me. So he said, no, it's about, so I pretend as if I'm silly. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, that thing. So I said, that thing what? Hasn't it got a name? And then he come out with what he was saying. So I said to him, well, I already done what I want to do. So anyway, he asked me afterward, and I put his name on there. And then along the line, I came in one day. I moved back to this area, and when I came in one day, I saw a letter on the table from the Building Society. He wasn't paying anything.
Okay.
So by then I had money of my own, because I was taught to do that by my auntie. So I follow what the older people says.
Yeah.
And I went to the bank manager and I explained, and she said if I want to reduce the mortgage. So I said, no, I don't want to reduce it. So I pay up what was owed, and from then I started paying it out of my wages, because I was being a civil servant then, because I was studying a lot, you see. He didn't do anything, so I was studying because I want to move forward. So, and I want money to show to church. So I thought to myself, so, well, if I can do, God give me the strength to do these things, then I'll give back a bit of it to the church, And apparently, he went off then because he was getting a bit naughty. So I prayed. I could have hurt him, but I didn't want to do that, because God said to me, don't do that, just pray. So I keep praying and praying and praying, and all the funny things what he done, I just pray. And I just went to work then, and I came home, and my little son said to me, he's gone. So I said, give God thanks. They say prayer don't work, but it does work.
Amen.
So anyway, he was away in Jamaica for how many years, and I didn't divorce him. I just carry on with my life, working, looking after my son and everything like that, and whatever. And then I understand he came back, and he was completely gone. The faculty's gone. So I went in the hospital and I saw his condition. So I didn't thought about forgiveness in my heart, but I just said, God, give me the strength. So I know I was a supervisor at work, so I went, asked for time off, and go and do the best I can for him. And then I had to leave that job, so I was studying now for another job. And then when I went to the hospital, he was gone. His family, they told the hospital not to let me know. So I forget him then. And then years down the line, he passed. And then the family came down on me, wanted me to bury him. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And I didn't do it, so. The actual question is, all of all the years, I'm not talking about 5 years, I'm talking about nearly 20 years I've been paying for the property on my own, do all the repairs and everything. And now his nephew asked me to sign a paper, and I said, being like a silly, I said to him, I don't mind signing paper, but I need to know what I'm signing for, who I'm signing for, and what's the reason for me to be signing. Then he took my name round to London at the court, and they wrote me a letter about deputyship. So I know what deputyship means, and I look in the dictionary, and I asked the solicitor, and she gave me the same answer. So I didn't
So
sign no paper.
What's the question?
So the question is, why can they take, why the family is like they want to come down on me as a ton of brick, and to say that like they want their share.
Okay. It might be better if we had like a private discussion about it, because it seems like there's quite, I don't really want to, because it's being live streamed as well, I don't really want to be mentioning names that. So maybe if we have a discussion afterwards, just you and I, that might be better. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Has anybody else got any questions? Yeah.
Yes, just a statement for those who may be concerned. Within the general conference, we have what they call plan giving and trust services, which as Seventh-day Adventists we try and make use of it. The one in the South England conference is suspended since the pandemic because they said they're at risk of suffering from lawsuits. So they suspend until further notice.
Is that the will writing service you're talking about?
Huh?
Is that the same?
The same trust service, will writing service. The SEC is suspended from the pandemic until further notice. But the one in GC seems to be in operation still.
I think it's kind of changed a bit how they do it though, in terms of, because I know they used to offer like free wills and stuff.
Yes.
But I think they've changed it now where they give a percentage or something.
Yes, I'm not even so much speaking about the cost
They
that might be attributed there. But the fact that as Seventh-day Adventists, it would be wise of us if we're concerned about the work and the second coming of Christ, to start where we can, as little, let me not say as little, as much as we can, to put our house in order. That we may find peace and the family may have peace and the work of God may go forward.
Okay then, thank you. I'm mindful of the time now, so I think we've got any more questions? I've kept you here for quite long. I don't want to wear you out. So,
Can I just sit down and on a piece of paper and write a will and say that's my will?
In a sense you can, so long as it's so long as you having all the necessary elements of what you need and make sure that it's witnessed properly and everything else, and it's got a date and it's clear. The only thing is that sometimes if you write a will yourself, there might be elements that are not very clear, so it might make your will challengeable.
Okay.
Because sometimes when people write their own wills, there's certain clauses that are necessary and they're not in there. So that's why it's probably better not to do it yourself.
So it's better a solicitor because they know all the jargon, etc.
Okay. But you can do it yourself. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So, who qualifies as a witness to the writing of the will?
Okay, so a witness has to be somebody who is over 18 usually and is not connected to the beneficiaries. Okay. Yeah, so you want somebody who's not a beneficiary. Definitely, just want somebody totally independent as possible. So like even just a neighbor, even just somebody that works down the road in, a professional capacity or in a shop or something like that. Just make sure they're not connected. Practically, but the thing is they need to put their name and address and occupation so they can be found. Yeah.
Some people don't like the idea of that, knowing that they are going to be probably sought after the matters and things.
Yeah. The reason why I said that though is you just don't want any sort of idea that you've been influenced in any way. You just want to keep it as distant as possible, really. Yeah. Anybody else? No?
Which of these would you say is a priority for you to decide to write a will? Having children or having a house? Or it depends on which one comes first?
I'd say it depends on which one comes first. Yeah, I think that's probably the way I'd do it. Because most people do write a will after they've had bought their first house. That's one of the key times when people write a will and they think about it. Yeah, and then some people, funnily enough, don't really think about it when they have children, but more likely when they've bought a house. But I think maybe it's because it's mentioned to them, because normally you go and you see like a mortgage advisor, and they probably ask you the question, have you got a will? And you said, well, obviously when you have a child, people don't normally say that to you in the hospital, have you got a will? So that's probably why you wouldn't think about it. Yeah.
Any more questions? Oh. Yeah. Oh, wait, sorry, just need to get the mic.
Sorry, just want to ask you, if I don't make any wills, the property will, if no wills, the property still go to the children automatically, because otherwise, what's going to do?
Okay, so it's not going to be automatic. They still have to apply for a grant if you have got children, or because like I don't know if you heard at the beginning of the presentation, we went through the intestacy rules. So it goes in order. So if you've got a spouse, the spouse would take priority. Then it would be the children, and then it goes to grandchildren, aunties and uncles, and all of that afterwards. So if the children are the closest relatives to you, then the children would get it. But they'd have to apply.
Okay, thank you. Because I think a lot of people hasn't got to Wales, and what's going to do with the house or the things they left? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because sometimes death is not predicted. It just happens.
It just happens, exactly. But the thing about it, when you've got a property, you have to apply to get a letters. If you haven't got a will, it would be letters of administration. If you have a will, it's a grant of probate. But either way, in order to deal with the property and transferring it to another owner, you need to have that in place. So you need the death certificate to prove the death. And then if you did have the will, you'd have the will as well.
Thank you. Are you going to leave your details or afterwards? Or?
Yeah. Is it still on the board? Yeah, it's still on there. I've got cards as well if you want to take a card, if that's easier.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions before we close? No? Okay. I just want to say a massive thank you to Kerrie for today's presentation. I have personally found it very informative. So can we just give a hearty amen to Kerrie, please? Yeah.
I found your presentation very informative, and also it was very scripturally based. I know that, people are sort of thinking, should we be doing this sort of presentation now? But everything that you did, you backed it up with scripture and Ellen G. White writing, which was very good. Thank you very much.
Yes, so I just wanted to say a massive thank you to Kerrie for this presentation. And I think as Adventists, we're very fortunate that we can have these kind of topics, because I've never actually had this kind of thing. I mean, my mum will talk to me about things like life insurance, wills, but it's good to have an actual professional. And a lot of this advice that we got today, we would have had to pay like how many hundreds probably to have this. So I just want to say thank you again, because we all got this for free. And I think as well, Kerrie, she's a solicitor, and being an Adventist as well is to our advantage that we have that. So yeah, thank you again. Could I call up Uncle Paul to do our closing prayer, please?
Amen. Let's stand as we close in prayer. Heavenly Father, it is with great pleasure that we thank you this evening as we come to the borders of the close of this Sabbath. That not only have you blessed us with your saving grace, reminding us of the cross of Calvary, in giving us this hope. And this evening, as we looked at the importance of will writing, it reminds us of the inheritance that you've promised us in the new heaven and the new earth. Help us, Lord, that as we go forward, we may have that wisdom to prepare for eternity and to use the resources that you've given us to the best of our ability in finishing the work of the gospel. We're in this great controversy where the enemy is seeking to rob, steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus came that we may have life abundantly. May you continue to bless this church, to equip us, to give the people that are tools in your hand to guide us into the path of truth, that on that day, on the sea of glass, we may have a great rejoicing. Be with our sister Kerrie and family. Continue to bless her as she continue in her service, and that her service may also bring others to the cross of Calvary, where they may recognize that we have a heaven to gain and a hell to shun. Bless your people as we prepare now to go into a business meeting. May your will be done, and may the glory and the honor be to your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Just a reminder as well that Kerrie's details are on the screen if anyone wants to take a picture, and you also have some cards, you said. Yeah, that she can give out after Sabbath as well.